I think we should start our event. Can I say good evening to everybody who's joined us for our drawing discussion this evening with Tricia Gillman and RNF Mo. I'm Anita Taylor. I'm the director of the Trinity Buoy Wharf Drawing Prize and of Drawing Projects UK, and I'm Dean of Duncan of Jordenston College of Art and Design at the University of Dundee. And I'm really thrilled to be welcoming everybody this evening to our drawing discussions for week 2 while the exhibition Trinity Buoy Wharf Drawing Prize 2020 is exhibited in London, sadly not to a public audience as planned, but we are maintaining our momentum with our online events, and we also have a virtual exhibition online that you can visit and explore the works in the exhibition. The exhibition has 71 drawings by 56 exhibitors, drawing practitioners included in it, and the drawing discussions have brought together people within the exhibition to talk about their work individually and to focus on the drawings in the exhibition itself. So the exhibition is chosen, the drawings are chosen without much information about them, and this is really again to focus on the works included in the show and selected by the Distinguished Selection Panel. This year, Francis Morris, director of Tate Modern, Ian McKeever, the artist, and Sophia Yadong Howe from the Cooper Gallery at the University of Dundee. So without further ado, what I would like to say is please ask questions via the question answer function. I have Fiona Cassidy with me this evening from Drawing Projects, who will be monitoring the questions and also the chat, just in case that's where you feel that you need to put your question or you get confused around where to ask them. We're very much here to hear from you as well in response to the wonderful presentations we'll hear from Tricia and RNF Mo. So we're going to go in order. So this is the bit without further ado. I'm really thrilled to be welcoming Tricia Gillman and RNF Mo, and we're going to invite Tricia to speak first about her drawings in the exhibition. Sorry, we've got a glitch on the slides for the moment. So we have their drawings in the show in front of us, and then if we go to Tricia, and I just want to introduce Tricia, who's a very distinguished artist, who's been a participant in the Trinity Buoy Wharf Drawing Prize and Sherwood Drawing Prize before it on several occasions. And Tricia was born in Johannesburg in South Africa, and she studied at Leeds University and at the University of Newcastle. She's lived and worked in London for a long time and is a very established artist. She's had solo exhibitions at the Arnolfini and at the Serpentine, and she's got many recent exhibitions that have been included in the catalogue in London, and many group shows and solo exhibitions. She's won awards, most recently in the Wells Art Contemporary, and we're really, really delighted to have Tricia here to talk to us about the drawing in the exhibition, Moments 3, Beneath the Skin. So thank you, Tricia. It's over to you, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Okay, thanks, Anita. Well, hello, everyone. And first of all, I want to thank you for being prepared to be available for yet another Zoom experience. It feels so frustrating not to be in a room with you and in front of the work itself. The work I'm going to talk about requires us to be connected to it in physical time and non-virtual space. It particularly needs the physical and emotional interaction of being in the same space together. That kind of unspoken animal chemistry that currently we all so sorely miss. So in other words, I'm saying this work is really not for the screen. But despite that, on screen we have the work in the show. And I really hope that you can see something of what I'm trying to do. I'll be really glad to hear whether or not you have at the end. So when I say that the work is not for the screen, it's because it's for intimate relation. By that I mean quite literally standing in front of a body-sized body proportioned thing. The work is a bit like another person standing opposite you. It's the shape and size of a life-size mirror, and it asks you to move in real space towards it and away from it as its fundamental request to you to engage. So what is that request? The work grows out of a desire to be present, to relinquish one's addiction to the cerebral narratives of past and future focus, and to land right here in the now. So can I have the second image, Anita? This is the series, Moments, and all three were longlisted for this prize. And Moments 1, which is on the left, and this one I'm delighted to say is currently being hung in the John Moores Painting Prize 2020 exhibition. And in the middle is Moments 2, which you might be able to see behind me, and that is Felt Sense. And on the right, the one shortlisted for Trinity Buoy Wharf Drawing Prize, Moments 3, Beneath the Skin. The series represents for me a laying bare, a stripping back. It aims to locate and process and document the moment by moment awareness of being conscious. It aims to map as directly as possible a time-based, non-judgmental experience of thinking, feeling, sensing, remembering, of being. Next image, please. So Moments 1, Mind's Eye. The quest in this series is for materials and processes that might harness and embody moment-to-moment consciousness, mapping movements of awareness as they emerge, focus, and melt away. As each work evolves, it continuously constructs and deconstructs itself, mirroring the emergence and dissolving of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. Materials and processes are chosen to set up a kind of butterfly net that scoops up the passing moment as directly and openly as possible. Have the next image, Moments 2. So firstly, I use unstretched, unprimed canvas. And for me, it feels unfettered and flexible and receptive, unassuming, offering a pliable, breathing openness and vulnerability, a bit like a tablecloth, a sheet or a shroud, gathering its imprints, registering its passage through time, a bit like my own body. And secondly, the markings are made with elemental materials, charcoal, graphite, pastel, their felt sense of the earth like dust, pollen, or sediment. I start these works on the floor, perhaps with a dilute stain or a spatter, and a scattering of floated fine graphite or grated pastel pigment. It feels a bit like an animal marking its territory with its scent, or that thing that dogs do, going round and round in circles to flatten the ground before they settle. Have Moments 3. Subsequently, I work on the canvas on the wall vertically. And initially, I approach the canvas quite often with my eyes closed and feel my way around the surface. And I've noticed that the first marking needs to be on the level of and opposite my heart. And once that anchor is in place, the work embarks on its journey. The inquiry into the unfolding of awareness needs to be as direct as I can imagine it and process it. Thought and felt sense surrender to the moment. Through response and adjustment, they bear witness to the continuum of now and the lure of half-formed latent states. Have the detail. Yeah, okay. So touch, layering, erasure become material embodiments for experience, accumulating the real-time spaces of presence. Through this, a rudimentary language emerges, registering different kinds of awareness, things seen, things sensed, things thought and remembered, things drifting up, only half sensed. And it's these distinct qualities of experience that seem to need different codes of reference. For example, the diagrammatic, an elemental grammar of stepping stones, like a square, a triangle, or a prism of shifting planes. Or the perceptual, a leaf, a seed pod, a bit of shiny litter I pick up on my daily morning walk. And then there's the experiential layering of felt sense, registered through the indexical phenomena of process, spatter, smudge, rubbing, layering. These shifts of language prompt maybe bodily identifications and are experienced perhaps with different faculties of awareness: head, heart, belly. Got another detail. There was a point in the evolution of these works when there was no avoiding the presence of words, a floating up of verbal information inherent in the continuous stimulus that is consciousness, a commentary, a naming, a poetic connection or reverberation, like a mirage or a dream, often linked and hinting to me what this one might be reaching down into. Words and phrases like mind's eye, lifeline, lifetime, or phrases like are we nearly there, or is there more, or nearly visible, touch, search, unfolding, home soon. Sometimes an emotion like joy, or sensation like tilting or yielding, or maybe a brush with the weather or the light or a fragrance. Sometimes a positioning like you are here or we're all in this together. Work is often driven by ambivalences about imagery, about overview, about inadvertent orchestration through ego drives or habits of aesthetic decision-making. I try to deflect my boundaries with strategies like continuously turning the canvas to avoid settling into a top and bottom, or by allowing responses to accrue on top of each other or side by side like lists, to try to encourage the container of the format to remain open, non-hierarchical, provisional, and unsettled. Incidentally, I don't see these works as specifically autobiographical. My aim is to use myself as a filter to register the imprint of consciousness that might equally well be you as me. Can we go back to moment 3? I was pleased and touched when the judges selected the third in the series, Beneath the Skin, because to me it feels like the most undefended one. No disguises, a bit bruised, a bit frayed. And that sense of exposed experiencing seems to me to be my request of myself and from the generosity of the viewer. No hiding, no dressing up. One thing leads to another. One thing obscures, another reveals. Allowing and acknowledging just this ordinariness. Building an imprint of mind time and body listening. A time-based record of being here. So at this point, I think I've said quite enough and would be happy to answer any questions or join in.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean that to go forward. I've just gone forward when I shouldn't have done. Sorry. There's a question for you, Tricia, while I try and get the control back, which is, what do you think of the viewing distance for your piece?
The viewing distance?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. It's ever so much to do with going close up, being, having your nose in it, really, and also moving backwards and forwards. So, yeah, it's actually something that I am still very concerned with. Is I'm used to making work which is much more assertive, much more present. And this work really does ask you to slow down and come up close. So it's important to be able to do that. But at the same time, I hope that from a distance, they have a light and a sense of body, of skin, of something which, is relatable to from a distance as well.
I think they certainly provide an invitation to explore the surface, and actually it's really lovely to hear you talk of them being the proportion of the body and having that relationship, because they certainly do that without even thinking about it being the proportion of the body. The sense of them being skin with a set of experiences, a set of thoughts, and that sense that they do feel a little like bruising or tattoos or things which are about experience being imprinted on you as an individual, but not necessarily autobiographically, and I think that's clear. There's another question around rotating the canvas while painting, which is about, is it a technique, is it something specifically for this set of works?
Well, it's kind of a strategy to not let me settle in to a kind of picture making. I'm so, again, my previous work was so much about aesthetics, really, and I don't see this as so much in that vein. So I try to keep it out of my reach in some way, in terms of habitual arranging that I might get caught up in. So the turning of the canvas is to keep me on my feet, on my toes, and to allow unexpected relationships to emerge, and not logical ones, or not ones that are to do with aesthetics.
That's a really interesting approach. There's a question in from Dan Roach, which is both to say thank you for a wonderful talk, but the commentary that precedes it is that the forms and motifs in your latest work seem much more open and slight than the bolder forms of the earlier work. And the question is, has this occurred naturally, or was it an intended shift?
Oh, that's a lovely question.
It's a very lovely question.
Yeah, lovely question. Thank you, Dan. It was very deliberate. I think I started doing this kind of work probably about 10 years ago now. And prior to that, it was almost like a kind of death. The work was kind of spiraling into a feeling of knowing it too well. And this work was really a beginning again. And I felt I had to let go of my familiar motifs, and even actually initially any organic form. So I the earlier stages of this work, I was only prepared to make rudimentary marks that arrived on the canvas and had no specific imagery base, but were just traces of having been here that were quite rudimentary. And I've allowed certain things to creep back in because they seem to need to, that are to do with my love of organic form and the kinds of things that I see every day on my walks. So it's kind of bridging in a way. I sometimes at the moment I think, oh, I've let that back in. But I'm cautious because I want them to be less to do with the visual in terms of the visual world and more to do with an inner state, kind of scratching about, trying to find something that embodies sensation and so on.
That's a terrific answer too, thank you. We've got a couple more questions, and I think if we take a couple more for Tricia before we introduce RNFMO, if that's okay with both of you. I think that's quite how we've wanted it to go, and it's great to have so many questions coming in. There's a question, it's from Tommy Ramsey. So it was about whether you could talk a little about the shifting colour in this work from previous work and what this makes room for in the current work.
Right. Lovely, thank you. Yes, it's very different. Previous work was much more highly coloured and assertive as well. And I think the shift in colour in these, I mean, it's you know, it's kind of felt like there wasn't any colour at all, but because comparatively for me. But the colour in these is so much more to do with sensations that are barely tangible, and to do with veils of light and very quiet and yeah, almost whispered. It's that kind of accruing of colour rather than a clear and stark sense of the vibration of colour, and is more like traces than it is statements.
And yeah, that's fantastic. There are two more questions. I am going to join one together. There are a couple of questions which are around the idea of starting with the heart, moving the heart, marking to another place in the body of the canvas. And somebody, or Ruth Broadbent, also wanting to know a little bit more about beginning from the level with your heart and
sorry, what was that, Anita?
It's the drawing from the level with your heart.
Oh yes.
Which is intriguing people. And is that something you now do consciously when you start a drawing, or and does it have any other rationale around it? I guess being left-handed, right-handed, other physical relationships you might have with mark making on a surface.
Right. Yes. Interesting. It's actually something I've only realised very recently, that this need to approach the canvas a bit like it's another animal that you're kind of moving around and taking stock of, and the anchoring of the first marks at the level of my heart was totally unconscious, actually. You know, I just thought, well, how am I doing that? And then I realized that it because the size and the proportions is so much like another person, this need to make a connection through the felt sense, through, if you like, the whole of you. And I kind of see the heart as the embodiment of the whole of you, if you like. So it's a very intuitive and emotive connecting device that was totally unconscious, and I don't think it could move. I think that it is a kind of anchor for me, and a place to take stock from.
And I love the idea of stalking the, stalking what's going to appear is really exciting, I think. I'm going to draw this part of it a close. There is one question sitting there, which we'll come back to at the end, which is, are there drawings or paintings, or does it not matter? But let's come to that one, given that's around the nature of the exhibition as much as anything. We'll come back to that one. And at the moment, I've got a very noisy train leaving the station next door to me. So hopefully we're past that now. So Tricia, thank you. Really fantastic, brilliant introduction to the drawings, very focused on the making of them, and a really fabulous insight to your working practice. So thank you. And we'll come back, I'm sure, with some more questions towards the end. It's now my real pleasure to introduce RNF Mo, who studied at City and Guilds of London Art School, at the Royal College of Art, at Central St Martin's, and that includes a PhD at Camberwell at University of the Arts London. Many selected exhibitions, many publications, lots of different aspects of drawing are explored within RNF Mo's practice. And I know that you're going to talk a little bit to that, the scope of that practice. So RNF Mo, welcome, and really looking forward to hearing about your drawings.
Thank you so much, Anita. Thank you very much for inviting me. Hello, everybody in Zoom land. Okay, so I have two small drawings in the Trinity Buoy Wharf drawing exhibition, Cowboy Reflect Me and Person and Horse. These images are both found in the process of making, informed by previous experience and things that inspire me and whatever happens to be uppermost in my mind at the time of drawing. I call this method a pareidolian archaeology. Pareidolia is, for instance, seeing Jesus's face in a piece of toast. If I may explain, previous experience, drawing and narrative have been central interest to me since I was a student in the 70s and in the early 80s, beginning my practice with what was then called journalistic illustration, recording events through drawing. Slide, please, Anita. I was a flaneur, not Walter Benjamin's turtle walking its seat, but Baudelaire's flaneur. He named the term for his friend, the painter Constantine Guise. Privilege of birth, time and place, and cheap standby flights allowed me to spend 20 years, slide please, drawing in different places, on ships and trains and planes, recording events. So, later in the noughties, I returned to college, and thinking about the different outside spaces in which I'd drawn, I looked for evidence of an interaction between the outside environment and the practitioner when they work outside. Slide, please, Anita. Making performance drawings of, in, and onto the landscape. I acted out different stories through performance drawing. Slide, please, Anita. Can I do a quick plug here? Especially as this year's drawing prize winner, You Are At It by M. Lauren, and I think you're here tonight, is a collaborative performance drawing. Congratulations. This book, Performance Drawing, written by 3 colleagues and myself, was recently published by Bloomsbury and is available to buy online. Go and get one. It maps a comprehensive background to the performance drawing process. That was my plug. So, when I was looking into drawing on the environment, in the environment, and onto the environment, I was also researching how different people interpret and are impacted by the environment. Slide, please, Anita. I read about Bachelar's phenomenology, that the house you were born in teaches you to navigate your environment through all your senses. Slide, please. Geographer Douglas Peacock's belief that people are shaped by their non-human environment. Slide, please. Scientists Ellen Churchill Semple and Jocelyn Bell Burnell, who I've just told is the head of, I can't hear you.
Chancellor.
Chancellor. Chancellor of your college. Okay. Their knowledge about that we are made from the earth of dust and the stuff of stars, and Rupert Sheldrake's idea that when we perceive the environment, we are also extended out into the environment. So it could be said that we are drawn and shaped by place. So I want to know, do places yearn for us in the same way that we yearn for places? These are some of the ideas and experiences that feed my drawing process now. Things that inspire me. I'm inspired by all kinds of 3D, 2D, and time-based imagery, from Studio Ghibli, Spirited Away, through graphic novels such as Tove Janssen's Moomin stories and her paintings, and Robert Crumb's A History of America. Slide, please. Emma Talbot's installations, paintings, and drawings, Rose Wiley's strong figures, and Roy Oxlade's unrendered, edgy painted drawings, or are they drawn paintings? I'm intrigued by the merging of drawing and painting that many people, slide, such as Amy Silman, play with today. I enjoy exploration of all kinds. I'm an Instagram groupie. I find and watch many people's work on that platform, and I use Instagram as a pacer, posting my work to keep an workflow at pace. Instagram, I mean, Joanna Kirk posts her elegant and fabulous series, hashtag Flowers of the Future. Their strangeness reminds me of the director James Cameron's plant and animal designs for his Pandora in the film Avatar. He went deep sea diving to research material for his other planet world. Another explorative journey that inspires me is the International Space Station. When the astronaut Chris Hadfield was commanding the station, he tweeted a series of images showing details of Earth. Slide, please. With one image, he asked his Twitter audience, "What do you see?" And that triggered in me a fascination with the idea of pareidolia. What do we see? How differently do we interpret what we look at? When I work, I don't want to dictate an idea to the viewer. I'd rather suggest something that allows for various interpretations. Slide, please. In Cowboy Reflect Me, the cowboy looks away and towards us. The cowboy is an iconic figure. He can be interpreted in numerous ways. He might be the lonely cowboy, a romantic cowboy, a downtrodden cowboy, a salt of the earth cowboy, the joke cowboy with an oversized hat. He might be one of Annie Proulx's Brokeback Mountain's cowboys, or he might be the writer-actor Sam Shepard from one of his plays, in his words, having trouble taming the wild. In my picture, I show the cowboy reflecting the viewer as a small female, while his companions, two dogs, wait patiently. So it could be said that in a sense, the audience is performing for the cowboy, and breaking the fourth wall, the cowboy holding the mirror is reflecting a version of us back to us. But I've made up all this description a long time after I did the drawing. I've had time to play with the ideas of what kind of story this is, what kind of picture this is. So they're my ideas. So I'd like to say again, I don't want to dictate an idea to the viewer. I'd rather suggest something that allows for various interpretations. Slide, please. Ideas around performance and otherness often reappear in my work. Otherness is sometimes shown through different types of creatures and small interactions or relations between creatures, person and horse being an example. The horse is clearly the most sensibly aware and grounded of the two. The person can hardly stand upright in their befuddlement. The idea of performance and living beings existing in different dimensions alongside each other can be said to describe us now. Each one of us is in our own head, performing one type of ourselves for another that is watching. I'm performing to you now, showing you a version of me, RNF Mo, on your screen in our virtual world. Slide, please. When I begin a work, I follow the shapes I see in the materials that I'm moving on the surface. This is a pareidolian archaeology, and it relates to three of my favorite short tales about drawing. The first is Pliny the Elder's story of the Potter Buttigieg's daughter drawing around her lover's shadow on the wall. Her trace caught an essence of him, keeping it with her long after he'd left on his journey. Some people call this story the birthplace of drawing. The second is Derrida's rereading of Levinas. It's about another kind of trace, messages from beings that exist in different dimensions. The quote reads, "He will not have been a present, but he will have left a gift by not disappearing without leaving a trace." Think of a handprint on a cave wall, or the paving stone worn away from years of footfall, or a footprint on a path. These could be seen as gifts, messages sent to us from the past by others, presented to us in our now, in a sort of time travel. I can't find a reference for the third short tale, so if anybody knows, please can you tell me? It may be a studio myth or rather than an urban myth. It goes something like this. A notable painter gave his new studio hands a dirty rag and told them to throw it at the wall and use the marks, the dirt left, as a starting point for a landscape painting. I think this throwing dirty rags at a wall for a starting point could be seen as an example of Paradonian archaeology. Last slide, please. Work happens like that sometimes. The shapes of marks trigger visual recognition, and whatever is in the mind and the unconscious has a hand in shaping those triggers into a form. While merging drawing and painting, I want to develop images in the process of making. It's a sort of conjuring. And that process of making holds for me a sense of aliveness and surprise. My aim is to keep what I'm doing alive. That's it.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I think we're encouraging questions to come in. I think what's really interesting is to hear about that process of making. And I love the idea of pareidolia archaeology, because it seems to me that that is about, the premise of how do we find an image, how do we ascribe it, how do we make through materials, how do we think through materiality, and then how do we ascribe it meaning, and how do we invite others to ascribe meaning to it as well. So that reflection back is something that I think actually does sit quite meaningfully in both of your work to some degree. They're very different works, so I'm not drawing you together, but I think there is something about the mode of making and exploring image making that has a real resonance around it. I don't know if you want to say a bit more about the idea of the performance and identity within that performance, RNFMO.
In terms of the fact that I have an AKA, you mean my name? Well, I think it's absolutely related to the research degree that I did a few years ago, in which I found that I was performing, not intentionally, but again, that relates way back to in the 80s when I was drawing in public spaces and realized that when cameras were pointed at me, I took on a pose and I behaved differently. And this I didn't understand it at the time, but later I understood that it is a performance. If you're going to be doing anything other than an ordinary day-to-day action within the ordinary context of that action, and if you're going to be seen by another person, then it is a performance, and particularly if you're marking the ground or in something like that. So I understood that, but I think for me, I want it to have a playfulness, the idea of having different costumes, different names. Numbers of people take on different names. It's fun.
Absolutely. It's just really lovely to hear you talk to that in the context of the work. So fantastic, and thank you. Do you want to say something about the materials and the materiality of the images and the drawings that you have, particularly these in the show?
The ones in the show, they're made on cardboard, and I think that right now in our time of pandemic, in the year of plague or 2 years of plague, cardboard is very, very much part of the material of our day. The amount of boxes we have our vegetables, foods, and stuff delivered in, it became an abundance, and there's also something very informal about it. The informality I enjoyed, and the color of it, brown paper, it's like wrapping paper. So there's all of these different ideas came together, and I started working on it and found that it takes water-based pigments well you know, you don't have to prime it or anything like that, and it gives you another color that you're working on, so that white becomes a color, or if you see what I mean. Um, the one thing I did discover about it, and I think Birgitta, who is listening, knew this already, but I didn't understand it. It has a grain, cardboard. I didn't understand that. And when you wet it and you work on it, it warps.
Yeah.
And so to stop it warping, you have to get another bit of cardboard and put the grain going the other way on the back, and then it will stay sound. So
That's great. I'm just looking at the questions and time and thinking about how we've opened this out to everyone. I think really great to hear about that choice of materials, and I agree with you. It is very much a material of our time, and that it's a colossal amount of card that everybody has to hand. And I think one of the very distinctive things in this year's selection is that sense of provisional materials and the sense of making out of what's available, and making sense of that and making meaning through it. So thank you for talking to that. There are some more questions coming in. If you're both happy to, you may have questions for each other. But we'll take some questions from the audience, and many of these are directed. So there's another question back to, well, actually there's one that's an open question, but I wonder whether actually both of you, it is for Tricia, is about the association of sensations in relation to the materials you choose to apply to the canvas. And I wonder if you'd like to respond to that.
Yes, again, that's a lovely question. I think, first of all, I think I want the materials to be organic, so that they, you know, they belong in a way to a sense of being a body, and being of the earth. So that's important, but also that they're kind of rudimentary, and that the canvas as well as a surface, you know, like Mary Claire, I really love cardboard. I love working on cardboard too. And the canvas felt to me to have a similar quality, although it does have all the kind of mainstream associations too. But I feel that the canvas really is a kind of equivalent for skin, or for a receptive surface, and I suppose that's why I choose, like, pencil is, again, it's a kind of basic thing. It's something we used as kids. It's a mark making bottom line, if you like. And so I feel that about all the materials. And in relation to sensation, I mean, it's such a kind, you know, I really feel like trying to record a sensation is really like a kind of, you know, an almost impossible thing. It's so fundamental. How do you get it to embody these kinds of very on the edge type of realizations and awarenesses? So it needs to be very basic.
Thank you. And we've got a question in for RNF Mo now, which, or maybe it's a question which may be a comment, which is the marking the studio walls story, perhaps a version of Cotman's method of imagining and developing landscapes from random blobs.
what is it? Say again.
Is the marking the studio walls story perhaps a version of Cotman's method of imagining and developing landscapes from random blobs?
Oh, how lovely. I don't know.
It's
That's
nice,
very
isn't
nice.
it?
Thank you
It's
so
one
much.
to look
Yes.
into, I think, which is great. There's another question, which is, you both referred to your selected works as both drawings and paintings. And the question is partly also perhaps to me, but definitely to you, is that I think in a minority of events and prizes is labelling itself drawing. Do you think that labelling is now out of date?
What, labelling it as a drawing or a painting?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much work that's both or neither, isn't it? So, yeah, I mean, I see a lot of my paintings as drawings. So, I think that distinction is too narrow or not elastic enough, not particularly helpful.
And RNF Mo?
Well, I've been trying to find a word that would describes both. Pawings doesn't do it. But there must be a word somewhere, and I haven't found it yet. But I think yeah, it's too narrow. There's been a merging of the two for a long time, and it enriches the whole field, and I celebrate it.
Thank you. I'll come back to that at the end if the question is still there, in terms of why we set up the drawing prize and what the discourse is. And it is about trying to understand what we call a drawing and what we don't call a drawing. So all of these conversations are part of that whole dialogue, which has a whole set of other things.
Can I ask a
around
question?
it. Yeah.
Does it matter anymore?
I don't know if it matters anymore. I think there's still an under-researched and under-articulated vocabulary of drawing, which is actually partly what we set out to do, is to think about how do we talk about drawing, because we talk about drawing in a lot of shorthand for things that may or may not be drawing, and it is about celebrating the act and the creative force of making drawings. It's also about still doing that, and maybe we've contributed what we should contribute. I think there's still quite a lot of information we're finding and celebrating through the project. But it's an absolutely appropriate question, but it sits within that sense of where does drawing sit? It isn't necessarily drawing for painting by any means. Drawing operates in all sorts of different forms and processes of making and creating, which there's that conversation around. So it is about having that dialogue, and it's an important dialogue to have, both whether it matters and whether there is still work to do in that area. So
I think Anita, I think it's not a closed conversation remotely. You know, I think one of the lovely things about the drawing prize is the breadth of attitude to drawing, and you know, things that get in to that mix each year as drawing. It feels life enhancing to have that breadth. So I think my comment was more to do with closing it down.
Yeah.
And actually having it as a lovely platform for questioning what is drawing. And, you know, essentially it's so much to do with exploration, isn't it? That, you know, it could be in any material. It's an attitude, isn't it?
It's an attitude, it's a process, it's all sorts of things. And I think that's the dialogue and the debate that we have. And it's lovely to hear you say that. There's another question for RNF, Mo, Marie Claire. Do you have a preferred pareidolia maneuver in the manner of tossing rags or other things? It's actually, there's a bodily process, a physical function.
Well, I not really. It depends it depends where I am when I'm making something. If I'm in my studio, then it's brushes and powder pigment and mixture of gum arabic and glycerin and run at the canvas and kind of scrub away. Actually, I think it was Guston who talked about the fact that when he's in a studio, there are a number of people in the room with him and himself, and it's not until all the people go and he leaves that something begins to really happen. And so there are ways to interrupt my mind from getting in the way that I undertake, and one might be dancing or listening to the radio music or that kind of thing. It is I think perhaps what you're talking about is how do you get direct access to the unconscious. Maybe that's what you're talking about, and that's how I would attempt it. Doesn't work, but often, but sometimes it does.
That's a helpful answer, and that came from Chris Bruce, actually, who's also in the show.
Okay.
An interesting question, I think, also And Chris is part of the conversation tomorrow with
good.
Isabel Rock.
Right.
There's a question from M. Lorem, which is about, could we hear a little bit more about your performative drawings on landscape?
Yes, buy the book. Sorry.
That's the short answer. And the long read.
That's That's the short answer. The slightly longer answer is as I mentioned before, I was trying to look for evidence of an interaction between the person that makes work outside and the environment itself. And I found that when you do a drawing from observation, there's no connection at all. If you do a drawing onto the ground itself, then it becomes a direction, like a sign, and very much like sheep trails running through a field. If you draw a very long line in gypsum onto grass, people will follow the line in this weird way. And so that's an imposed direction. So that is an interaction, but an interaction occurs when you use sound as a material and you produce it yourself. So you are the tool with the sound coming out of you, and the sound then reverberates and reflects and echoes with the environment. So you could say, it's very interesting because one of my supervisors said to me after I'd finished my PhD, that's a load of baloney. But at the time, he kindly carried on and allowed me to go with this thing. And you can say that sound interacts and echoes and reverberates with the environment. So therefore, there is an interaction with place. I'm not sure if that's what you wanted to hear, but otherwise buy the book.
We all wish we could say that, which is great. There's another question coming in for you, Tricia, which is around the timescale for completing a work. And are you responding to sensations over a day, a week, a month? And how do you consider and select the space on the canvas to transfer that sensation?
Okay. Yeah, is that question, will I find that question in the...
It's in the Q&A if you can see it. It's from Jane Eaton.
It's from?
Jane Eaton.
Right here, time, scale, complete work. Yeah, so it's an interesting one, this, because initially when I started doing this work, they needed to be like quite a short time span, that there was a directness and spontaneity that was necessary. And any kind of willful overworking in order to make something seemed to kind of totally counter the energy and intention of the work. And I sometimes felt kind of, oh gosh, is this enough? And how am I going to make this develop? But actually, over time of making these, they I know it's a usual thing, I think, that they develop their own momentum and the sense of being able to accrue responses and adjustments over the top of others became a kind of momentum that was to do with the kind of layering of the inner world, if you like the mind and the way that things move across and eclipse and get lost and come into focus, and a kind of spaciousness of mind, if you like. But so that necessitated a longer time span. So the work actually takes much longer now. I think that's one of the things that she was asking. What's the other thing?
About selecting the
Consider
space.
and select the space on the canvas to transfer. I'm not quite sure I understand what that means. That it may be, yes, maybe it is to do with overlayering and eclipsing oneself, which is part of the process of making these works, that I try not to have a taste relation with what accrues on the canvas. I try to roam and see and not see. So quite often the marks do become quite kind of mucky and overloaded, and clarity is lost. But it kind of feels right. It, it kind of humbling because, I don't have the kind of rights over the look of it that I might have had in previous work that I've done. But I feel that's necessary and important in terms of the intention.
Brilliant. That's a fantastic answer and a very fulsome answer. We are getting quite close to time. There's been a wonderful riposte to the by the book, as I've bought it already. So there you go. But I think what I would like to say is this is very much an open dialogue and an open conversation. I think it's been an enormous privilege to hear both of you speak this evening and to hear more about your drawing practice and the intersection of what that drawing practice might be or what it might mean, and where does it sit within the wider context of very different practices that you both have. But there is something rather wonderful about that archaeological sense of rehearsing the body, rehearsing the trace, performative mark making, which I do think sits across both of your practices, and they're very much about embodying the sense of being in the world in very different ways, but they both have a kind of diaristic, notational, being very much in the present and creating a visual response to what it's like to be in the here and now through the means of drawing. And I do think they're through the means of drawing. Having, we spend hours thinking about this and looking, and I've had the joy of spending time with the work as well, and they both have that character of line over an open ground, of touch, mark making, the imprint that you put onto the surface of your chosen found surface to some degree, which represents something else. So it's been the most astonishing privilege actually to have you both here, both
Thank you.
presenting very thoughtful, very incisive, very intelligent and carefully considered presentations about these works. I couldn't recommend more highly that people engage more with the works that you're making. I love the idea that one's in Liverpool and one's in London, Tricia, if that's the right thing, and that somehow they're bridged by the painting behind you. It's really about being out in the world and having that presence, and they're both terrific drawings. Congratulations both for being in
Thank
the
you.
exhibition, and thank you for your generosity, support, and humble approach to the role of drawing and exploring its capacity, both within your own practice, but actually your generosity in sharing that with others, both in teaching, thinking, writing, and making. So
Thank
can I
you so
say
much.
one enormous thank you to you. Thank you so much to everybody who has joined us this evening. We hope you've enjoyed the drawing discussions. They're intended to provide an informal space to hear from people around drawing, and we will eventually get this up onto the Drawing Projects UK YouTube channel so that you can reflect on what was here. You can see the images and zoom in on them in your own time on your own screens. Brilliant presentations, a brilliant audience. We have drawing discussions tomorrow night, Thursday night. So we have Chris Bruce and Isabel Rock tomorrow, and we have Mark Clay and, I'm going to have my moment, Mark Clay and Peter Sutton on Thursday. And then on Friday, we have a teaching drawing symposium and the What's Next drawing correspondence event. So we hope you'll join us or are already booked to join us for some of those. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future. The Trinity Buoy Wharf Drawing Prize will head out back on tour, we hope, in the real to Bournemouth later in probably late February to March. We don't know quite what lockdown means, and we'll be confirming the dates and details for that. But thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Thank you to two fantastic presenters. And thank you, Fiona, behind the scenes. So good night.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank
you,
you, Anita. Thank you all.
Thanks, Tricia.
Bye-bye.
Bye.